The reality is he doesn't even have to send those submarines off. He's like you said, like we did in the Falklands. We've said there was something down there that changed the way that the Argentinians operated, and this may change the way the Russians operate.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, today, on day 1260 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation or full-scale war with Ukraine, um, we're very privileged to be talking to Ryan Ramsey. Now, Ryan is a former nuclear submarine captain. He commanded HMS Turbulent, which is a Royal Navy nuclear-powered attack submarine, and that was back in 2011. And you published a book titled SSN 14. But you also taught submarine captains on the Perisher course, which is globally recognized as one of the toughest maritime courses in the world for both the students and, as you said, the instructors. Ryan, welcome to Frontline.
Thanks very much, Philip. It's good to be here.
Yeah, well, submarines, we got you on because submarines have sort of come into the press this week after Donald Trump has said a few things. But before we get on to that, having commanded a nuclear powered hunter killer submarine, you've operated at this silent end but sharp end of what military capability is doing on a daily basis. No other military capability is engaging with hostile forces in the way that you'll have done through your career, day in, day out. Um, Give our listeners a sense for what it's like, as a submarine commander, and what the tensions will be at the moment in the North Atlantic, the Baltic, and everything else where we're encountering not just the Russians but Chinese and other hostile forces.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is really, really complex, the underwater battle space. And particularly as, for example, if you detect a submarine, you first have to classify and work out what type of submarine it is and who it actually belongs to before you decide what you're going to do next. The tension on board a submarine, I mean, as submarines go away, I would describe it as 70% boredom and 30% pure adrenaline. And things happen really, really fast. You think it's kind of slow, but because detection ranges are being reduced, engagements are really, really quick, and you have to make decisions on your feet. Your crew is the priority always. You take them away from their families to go off and do these missions. You want to make sure they come back safely, but also maintaining the tactical advantage and being ahead of the enemy and making sure that or potential enemy, should I say, and making sure you're in control of the situation is everything.
In reality, how good are we compared to the others?
Okay, so I think you need to look at this in two ways. So there's capability and then there's people. So capability wise, we are still in the front runners. The Astute class is an incredible submarine when they're at sea, and then also it compares with the Russian Yasen class. It compares with the US Virginia class. So we're still up there with regards to capability. What always gave us the advantage was people. So training the best submarine captains that we possibly could. And actually, I think Tom Clancy put it best, which is, British submarine captains are actually feared because of the training and capability and experience that they have. It might be less so now, but the reality is the Perisher course is extremely complex. The amount of money that's spent on training one particular individual captain is over £1 million per person. The amount of assets that we put in place to do that's what gives us advantage.
Yeah, we'll not go down the Tom Clancy rabbit hole because we could talk about Hunt for Red October all day, I'm sure. But that gives us a segment into the United States. The reason why we're talking submarines is uh, Donald Trump has ordered. He said he's ordered 2 U.S. nuclear submarines. He didn't say whether they were powered or nuclear armed. The nuclear armed or nuclear powered as well, to take forward positions close to Russian waters. From a strategic perspective, is he just stating the blindingly obvious that they're always in the right place at the right time, or is this him trying to push a deterrent or a provocation line?
Well, I thought a lot about this, as I do for most of Donald Trump's sentences when he speaks, because you never know where it's going to go or what effect he's actually trying to have with that. I thought it was a bold statement in the fact that telling anybody what you're doing with submarines, people don't normally do that. It's a clandestine force for every nation. It's gathering intelligence. It's doing all those kind of things. Then, of course, there's a strategic deterrent, which is the last line of defense for any nation that has it. So I think what he did by saying he was sending 2 submarines, it could have been more submarines or whatever it was. He was very specific about the numbers, but it means that the Russians now have to think about where they divert forces to detect these. And within the Russian HQ or the maritime headquarters, I'd be certain there'd be a lot of people wondering, what is the intent of those submarines and what do we need to do to retain tactical control.
So this was, a good bit of messaging in the same way that, he did exactly the same in 2017 with North Korea just before he went to see Kim Jong Un. But also, we did it in the run up to the Falklands, or during the Falklands War, before we actually got, or maybe we already had a nuclear powered boat down in the South Atlantic. But certainly that caused the Argentinians something to think about. So the use of submarines and talking about it is as much an information operation for positivity. And do you think that's what he's been doing here?
Yeah, I do, because the reality is he doesn't even have to send those submarines off. He like you said, like we did in the Falklands. We've said there was something down there that changed the way that the Argentinians operated, and this may change the way the Russians operate.
Okay, but so the Russians have now increased their readiness and they're out looking hard for submarines. But you've been in the commander seat. What are the sort of risks and challenges on crews when you're out in a mission like that, knowing that all of a sudden those forces that you're trying to keep hidden from are being more active and proactive in trying to find you? And how do you balance the need for aggressive positioning with a sort of imperative to remain undetected, especially when you're getting into the likes of supposedly the capable Russian forces and supposedly the capable Chinese forces?
Yeah, so it is really tough as a captain in those kind of patrols. And I can't talk about specifics, but generally there's a piece about remaining. If you get detected, it's got political consequences, and that's a real problem. So the objective is, you might have some intelligence you want to gather. That's one part of it, but avoiding counter detection and remaining safe become the focus. And it's this really tight balance for any captain in those circumstances, because you might have to go miles and miles away from where you need to be, and therefore you're not achieving your aim, but you are avoiding counter detection. And how you justify these decisions, because every decision that you make is looked at and analyzed when you get back, and you need to be able to justify those. So it's exciting for those captains, without a doubt. You're at the front line, things are happening, you don't know what's going to happen next. The political context is everything as well. Really, really exciting. But that'll be in the back of their minds, the crew, the decisions they're making, the analysis that's going to happen afterwards.
Yeah, and again, so to get your understanding, for those that are listening, what sort of length of time on a nuclear powered attack boat are you going to be out in the patrol?
So if I take my final deployment, was 286 days away from the UK. So we sailed in February and came back in December, of which we did quite a few patrols. The longest patrol I've ever done was 99 days. In general, you might, for those kind of patrols, it's 60 days. But you're also seeing the strategic missile submarines going out for over 200 days at the moment, which is insanely long to do those. So it is really tiring, as you can imagine. 60 days. The team are in a watch cycle of 6 hours on, 6 hours off continuously. The captain doesn't sit in that watch cycle because he or she might be needed immediately. But yeah, it's exceptionally busy.
Yeah, now I know the nuclear armed boats will spend their whole time under the sea, but is that 60 days? You're submerged for the whole of the 60 days, or
Yeah, definitely. So those are submerged. So I mean, if you look at that 286-day deployment, 237 days of that 286-day deployment were underwater, effectively, not in one go.
crikey, wow! Now we're seeing the Russians conduct their own significant naval exercises. You know, they've just finished a big one that's brought a number of their fleets together, apart from the Black Sea Fleet, and they've coordinated that. We'll talk the Black Sea Fleet in a moment, but do you think these are pre-planned drills? Are they real-time naval response to the increasing NATO posture? Do the Russians have capabilities that they're trying to demonstrate by way of their information operations against us? And are they as good or as bad as people think?
So they do these exercises regularly, and they're definitely a demonstration of force as opposed to tactical. Them creating their own tactics and everything else. Is showing the world exactly what they can do, and the capability they have. So you see them firing lots of missiles and depth charges and all kinds of stuff just to prove that they've got this capability. Um, Whether they're good at what they do is another question. I know in the UK we have a tendency to overrate a lot of people's capabilities. I was fortunate enough to meet my adversary in 2009, who's captain of one of the Russian kilos, and I was pleased to say he was just like just like me. So we had this vision of some Ramius out of Hunt for Red October, and actually he wasn't Ramius from Hunt for Red October, but just a standard submarine captain, just as I was then. So yeah, I think we tend to overrate their capability. However, that said, the two newest submarines, the Yasin class and also the Bore class, are exceptionally capable. They often put videos out on YouTube of the inside of these things, and I spend most of my time, my free time, sadly, looking at these videos to work out whether their capability is better or has improved than in the past, and it is definitely improving.
Yeah, well, we have tend to overestimate their capability, and I think on land, the Russians' ability to um, prosecute its operations in Ukraine have shown that tactically they're not good. And the Black Sea Fleet, I think, is an example of where, from a naval capability, they are being they've been decimated effectively by a country without a navy. Do you think that reflects across all of the Russian fleets? Is that something that is um, a systemic problem within them? That I think the lessons that have come out are poor training, poor command and control, poor logistical support, meaning that there's poor availability of not just the platforms but the weapon systems, and therefore it'll be the ISR systems and everything else that are on board.
Yeah, so I think the submarine force is different because, particularly the Northern Fleet, they invest huge amounts of time and money in the Northern Fleet, out of all of the maritime operations that they do, and in particular the submarine force, because they believe that, as we do, the first line and last line of defence of Russia is in the maritime. I think the one thing we failed to look at, because you're absolutely right about their capabilities being proven to be not very good, but their psyche is very, very different. The Russian psyche and the Russian perception of life and its value is totally different to the way that we do it. So they don't fight by our rules, and that always becomes a problem. I've always thought that rules of engagement are everything, but we sometimes hamper ourselves massively when the enemy doesn't fight using the same rules of engagement.
Yeah, it's always difficult whenever you've got different rules and you're trying to play the same game. I've had the fortune, like you, to meet my counterpart on land in Kosovo when the Russians came down, and he was just like me, I suppose. On a one-on-one, but you never got into a vodka drinking competition with him. Yeah, that was the one thing that we avoided.
I do have a funny story about that. Just really quickly, I'll take a minute. So when we came into Bergen for the centenary of the Norwegian submarine service, there was a Russian submarine, there was us, there was a US submarine, and a German submarine. And I walked in, and the Russians were serving vodka, and I hadn't drunk for 65 days. And after the third one, I said, I can't do any more of this. And I go over to the US captain to see him because I know him. And then he says, here's our NCIS, the Navy police guy. And he said, right, the Russians have set up an observation post opposite the base. And whatever you do, don't drink the vodka.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Yes, we've got lots of drinking stories like that, and I'll avoid going down that rabbit hole today. But we've seen, in the last week, there's been reports about the Russian Navy and the Chinese Navy holding joint exercises. How concerned should we be about this increasing cooperation that there seems to be with China supporting Russia in its fight against Ukraine? We saw before that Chinese Navy coming up and exercising with the Russians. We've seen some Chinese army coming up and exercising with the Russians, and we've now got this exercise being built. Is this a level of cooperation that we haven't seen before?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the difference now, and it is genuinely concerning. And if you're in Asia Pacific, I'd be really, really concerned about this, which is where I think the focus will shift towards. At the expense of the North Atlantic, I think that's where this is going to go. But before the Chinese would turn to the Russians to learn tactics, and this is very different. The Chinese are so far advanced with their tactics and how they've built a navy. We always used to go, how are they going to train people to do stuff? And they've done it and they've managed it. And I think it's almost the other way around now. The Russians learning how they integrate with the Chinese, and the Chinese are the leading force.
Okay, interesting. But and how they integrate and all the rest of it. The latest Russian nuclear submarine. The Ukrainians seem to have pulled off a real coup by hacking in and getting the plans and publishing them out onto different websites, revealing sort of potential vulnerabilities and all the rest of it. Um, and all this comes at a time when Moscow, you say the focus might shift to the Pacific, but Moscow's also increasing its capability in the Arctic. And I suppose the trade routes through the Arctic connect Atlantic Pacific and are going to be critical to all of this. How significant is that sort of leak and that hack from a submariner's perspective? If you were going to command one of these new boats, would you be concerned that people have got an advantage now in trying to find you?
Yeah, I'd be slightly horrified by that, to be honest, because if the enemy already knows my acoustic signature and they've not had to come in, I've just lost one major advantage that goes with it. The only thing that plays against that is the fact that sonar technology now, I mean, submarines are so quiet now that sonar technology is struggling to keep up. And so actually it's all about using other methods in order to detect submarines. And interestingly, I mean, I've operated under the Arctic, under the North Pole and beyond, and that is a really harsh environment. So any advantage that you can get from intelligence like that gives you a huge advantage in that particular area.
So that's good on Ukraine, but again, good on Ukraine. If we shift to the Black Sea, uh, Ukraine doesn't have a navy. Um, Mind you, they've managed to systematically dismantle the effectiveness of the Russian Black Sea fleet, confining them really to close Russian shores, moving them out of their Black Sea Fleet headquarters that was in Crimea, sinking about a third of them, damaging about half of them. Um, how have they been so successful in achieving this level of denial of the seaway to a supposedly much superior on paper naval force?
Well, I think it's a classic example. Well, it's classic. It's not a classic example. It's a brilliant example of where a country with no maritime doctrine is not constrained by that and just looks for radical ideas to be able to do this. It's amazing when you think about it. Western nations are constrained by doctrine. Is thought to be a good thing, but actually it doesn't let you do the out of the box thinking. And so they've just moved at speed. Somebody's just turned around and said, "Hey, I've got a good idea. Let's do this," and they've just done it. Whereas if you tried to do that here in the UK and pushed it through the MOD procurement system, maybe 15 years later, you'll have what you should have had today.
Well, or 15 years later, you'll get something that is less than 60% of what you should have had today and what you really wanted, but will have cost 10 times the amount. Seems to be the way it works. But and I always remember people saying you should not apply doctrine dogmatically because that's when it starts to fail, which we tend to do. But do you think that the lessons that are coming out of that are going to revolutionize the way we procure our military equipment, the way we develop our capabilities in the West? And I suspect in every domain we're beta testing as many new weapon systems and capabilities as possible in Ukraine's war against Russia.
I would hope it does. I think that, so for example, whenever ever we wanted an urgent operational requirement, we always got a really great bit of kit, and you might pay more for it, but it was a great piece of kit whilst procurement caught up. I think it changes if other nations start doing exactly the same, which is, hey, look, let's make something cheap, simple, just does what it says on the box. That changes warfare because we either catch up and adopt the same form, or we lose out because having technology that's so complex is not always the answer. Simplicity in the complicated is the answer.
Oh, come on! From UK perspective, it has to be gold plated and diamond encrusted. Otherwise, it's not going to. Whether it works or not doesn't matter as long as it's at that elite level. I think seems to be UK procurement. Um, But Russia's still operating Kilo class submarines in the Black Sea, and we've seen them launching Caliber cruise missiles successfully into Ukraine. Ukraine's air defenses are having um, uh, better results against them. But how significant does the Caliber class threat in the Black Sea still pose? And conversely, how vulnerable are they to Ukraine's innovative tactics? We've seen them get damaged in port, but could there be other ways that they'd be vulnerable?
Well, I think let me take the first question first. So the Caliber missile is a bit like the Tomahawk land attack missile, the Russian version of it. Immensely capable, but slow enough to be taken out by air defense systems, and they don't have the same luck with hypersonics or some of the ballistic missiles that Russia's been firing into Ukraine. I think the next stage on from Ukraine's innovative way of dealing with submarines is, underwater drones, and how do they deal with it underwater. The difficulty for them then is how do they detect the submarine to start with. So that becomes probably the limiting factor. But I bet somewhere someone is trying to invent that capability to be able to be able to take out dive submarines in the Black Sea, and hoping that the West gives the surveillance capability they need to be able to detect them.
Yeah, I don't think either of us could actually expand on that and comment and without upsetting a few people. But yeah, I hope so too. Now you let's turn to the threat that you've warned about extensively. Uh, in some of the stuff that you talked about coming closer to home, but it also goes into not just the Black Sea, but the Baltic Sea and everywhere else. We've got our subsea infrastructure, our critical national infrastructure, and the cables. We've seen those being interdicted in the Baltic. We've seen them being supposedly cut around Shetland. We've seen Russian spy ships off key nodes in the Irish Sea and out in the Atlantic and everything else. And then of course, we saw the Nord Stream 2 pipeline getting damaged. How vulnerable do you think our subsea critical infrastructure is? And how much do you think our economy depends on the likes of you and your previous life managing to keep that safe?
I think we're an island nation, right? So we do rely massively on different cables, whether it's for communications, whether it's for energy, whether it's for a variety of other things. It is critical national infrastructure. The challenge, of course, is who's got responsibility for that infrastructure. Is it the owner of the infrastructure? Is it a government because it suddenly becomes critical national infrastructure? And then what can we actually do about whatever they're doing? So the first thing is, what are they doing? Now we assume they're cutting. They do cut cables on occasion, but are they gathering intelligence from that stuff? Are they sending other messages? Who knows what they're doing, because we haven't got anything that can go down that deep to go see what they've done. So developing that capability to be able to go and check and then repair becomes everything. But then also surveilling what their program does and who's doing that is also really, really difficult. So that does need military. It can't just be done from the companies that own the cables themselves. I think once they've sorted out the first bit of who's responsible for what cable, then they need to put the countermeasures in place to make sure that it can be protected.
But again, we're seeing attacking critical infrastructure, and I've sort of been caught slightly with our pants down. We've seen Ukraine innovate with drones in the way that they've managed to decimate the Black Sea fleet. Um, you, with all these changes that are coming in, do we have the flexibility in our, and not just UK, but our Western psyche to be able to innovate, look forward, look at how threats are developing, and create the countermeasures before the threat actually manifests itself? Or do you think, as you said earlier, we're too stuck in our doctrinally driven, dogmatic ways, and we're always going to be playing catch up?
I think there are individuals within the system that can come up with some great ideas. I said the beauty of being serving as captain on HMS Turbulent was we came up with some absolutely brilliant stuff, and we were able to deploy that stuff because we had control of HMS Turbulent. Effectively, we weren't answering to somebody else to get their sign off on whatever it does. And unless we change the process, we lose the chance of implementing these innovative ideas that people have really, really quickly to solve problems. It's like I said, I spent many an evening thinking about how to solve the problem about protecting critical. I've got some great ideas to go with it, but if I fed those in, it'd be decades before something was realized, and then it's all too late because we've moved on to something else.
Go on, give us a flavor. If you had to, you're put in front of John Healy now, and you're saying to John, right, you've asked me how to spend money. We need to protect this. What are you going to tell him to do?
Well, I'd turn around and say you need to think broader than just the critical national infrastructure. You need to think about the intelligence apparatus that goes with this in order to prevent, so you know what's coming, where it's going to, and what you need to intervene with. And then you need to have the capabilities to intervene that. And there's some great concepts out there. you just need to implement these things rather than using commercial off the shelf stuff as opposed to bespoke capability.
Yeah, so the latest ships that have been brought into Royal Navy colours are commercial off the shelf former North Sea oil rig support ships. Do you think that's the right way to go?
Well, I do in some ways. I mean, I was in charge when I left the Navy. I was in charge of a Shearwater, which was a high pressure, high temperature drilling platform in the drilling production platform in the North Sea. And I always used to look at the support vessels and go, "My God, those are impressive bits of kit that the Navy should look at buying." Because you can put some weapons on them, but all the other capability is incredible. So I think that's the smart move to bring those into the fold, and we should go out and buy more of them.
Yeah, but trying to dispel some of the myths that are out there. A standard nuclear attack submarine, whether it be British, whether it be American, whether it be Russian, whether it be Chinese, isn't ordinarily configured to go and schnurgle around critical national infrastructure, tap into it, cut it. They need other specialist things that can come and help them do that.
That's correct. I mean, attack submarines aren't designed for that at all. I think there was one potentially in the US that was, but and the Russians have their own underwater program with Lisharek is the name of the submarine that they use in order to do that. But there's other ways of doing it. You don't need submarines to be able to do it. You need ships with the right capability that could go all the way down, because how do they service those cables? They service them already using civilian ships with the right capability.
Yeah, and it seems to be that they're cutting them in a very simple way by just getting super tankers from the Grey Fleet, dropping their anchor, and just dragging them across, and that will damage anything else in the seabed.
Yeah, absolutely. The range of where they need to operate, it doesn't need to be in 4,000 meters of water. You can do it in 50 meters of water and easily create the same effect.
Yeah, the simplest approach is nearly always the best. Yeah, do you think the UK is in a position, and it's not just the UK, I suppose, it's our European nations and our American brothers as well are in a position to properly affect and protect the thousands of miles of infrastructure that are lying on the seabeds that we have out there, or have they just been randomly put down without the thought of protecting them at all? That's someone else's responsibility. And is this a true naval mission? Is it a mission for? Is it something that the companies that own the cable should be contributing to, so it doesn't keep hitting the defense budget? Do there need to be private naval security companies?
That's a really good concept. Now you got me thinking of a business idea there. I like that. The so the cables. I think the future generation of cables will all be armored sufficiently to deal with most stuff. So as you go through this replacement cycle of cables, then they will be better protected. But that doesn't take into account all the existing cables. So there does need to be something in place to be able to protect effectively. And why they might want to go for really deep water cutting of cables is because it's extremely difficult to go and repair them at that point, which then results in replacement, which then results in hits the economy, all that kind of stuff that goes with it. So the whole strategy between underwater cables is absolutely fascinating, and how you protect those. And I'm not certain that we've got that yet.
So, looking at things from a geopolitical perspective, and with the war between Russia and Ukraine, with what's happening in the Middle East, and we haven't touched on Iran and Iran's naval and submarine capability, and with what China is doing in Southeast Asia, do you think we're on a path that could develop into a more global conflict at some stage?
I'd like to think that that isn't the case, but it feels like we're closer than we've ever been to that potential, and that's not to be alarmist or scary or anything else like that. It's just that if everything repeats itself, and you only have to go back in history, and we've always said the nuclear deterrent has been the one reason we haven't had another world war 50, within that time scale, but people are becoming less interested in the impact of releasing nuclear forces. We talked about tactical nukes and all this kind of stuff like it's just a toy, and you're thinking this is really, really significant. So if our politicians aren't thinking in those terms, then it can escalate very, very quickly. I'm not talking about just British politics. I'm talking about politicians across the world, because those are the ones that decide where we go. So it does concern me. It feels like the world's as unsafe as it's been in my lifetime, and that's really, really concerning.
Yeah, and people don't realize, and this is, I think, the 80th anniversary of the Americans dropping the nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. People don't realize that there's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon. Dropping a nuclear weapon will have a strategic effect, and is something that should never happen. Do you think the use of the word nuclear by Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's team, Putin has used it himself, but all this came down to Medvedev threatening Donald Trump in the first place is not helpful.
I do think I think calming down the rhetoric would be a really really useful way. That there are different ways to I cannot believe that the diplomats who are clearly trying to negotiate and do everything else are helped by the rhetoric from either side. I just don't think it helps.
Well, Ryan, on that point, I hope the diplomats are listening. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me today on Frontline.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.